Hare Krishna, my name is Mahatma Das. I'm a disciple of Srila Prabhupada. I was initiated in Los Angeles, California in March of 1970. And people want to know from the older disciples of Prabhupada, what was it like to be with Prabhupada? And there was a great American woman, black woman, writer named Maya Angelou. And she said a very interesting thing. She said, people rarely remember what you said. They rarely remember what you did, but they always remember how they felt when they were with you. So I first wanted to focus a little bit on what it was like to be with Srila Prabhupada. And when you interview devotees, often they don't even remember what Prabhupada said, but they remember how they felt. And I think that's special because the feelings you get from the presence of a pure devotee are unique. So when I was in Prabhupada's presence, it was as if some wave of Krishna consciousness, some wave of spiritual energy was falling upon me. And my desires were being purified. My desires were being uplifted. In Prabhupada's presence, I just wanted to serve Krishna. It wasn't even an intelligent, conscious decision. It was just a flowing of the heart. This is what I want to do. I want to give my life to Prabhupada. I want to give my life to Krishna. And this desire just pouring out of the heart, just pouring. And I don't know where it was coming from. Of course, I know it was coming from Prabhupada. But from the level of Krishna consciousness I was on, one would say, well, you can't have desires so pure. You're not advanced enough. You're a very young devotee. But that was the effect of Prabhupada's association. It's just overwhelming desires to want to give myself to Krishna. Just like when a man and woman fall in love, it's not an intellectual process. They don't, write everything down. Well, you have this quality, you have that quality, and analyze it and come back 2 years later and decide. It just happens. So it was like that with Prabhupada, just the love that he invoked in our hearts for him and for Krishna would just start to overflow. And in the Shastra, in the scripture, it says that when you associate with an advanced devotee, you imbibe the qualities of that devotee. When you serve that devotee, you get their qualities. So by being in Prabhupada's presence, even very, very young devotees, very immature devotees, were feeling a very strong desire. I remember a story. This one person, he was just a hippie in San Francisco, and Prabhupada was there in San Francisco, and he came into the temple. And as soon as he saw Prabhupada, he started crying. He just looked at Prabhupada, started crying, and he didn't know anything about bowing down to the Guru. He just naturally just bowed down. And then he got up, and Prabhupada looked at him, and Prabhupada said, "This is love." So this is what it's like being in the presence of a pure devotee. And give you another example. The first time I met Srila Prabhupada, I was 19 years old. And I had been just beginning to practice Krishna consciousness. I didn't even know that much about it. I didn't even realize who Prabhupada was. But by fortune, some good fortune, I happened to be in Los Angeles at the time Prabhupada was arriving. So I went to the temple one morning. I didn't even know Prabhupada was coming. As soon as I got to the temple, they told me, Srila Prabhupada is arriving at the airport. Would you like to come? Of course I said, no, I don't want to go. No, I said, of course I'm going. We jumped in the van. I got to the airport. At this point, I wasn't following all the principles of Krishna consciousness. I wasn't chanting 16 rounds. I hadn't taken any vows. I saw Prabhupada. As soon as I saw him, I started crying. I was just overwhelmed by his presence. Here I am, an American boy, contaminated by the material culture I was raised in. And I see Srila Prabhupada, and it just invokes this intense feeling in my heart, and I start crying. So that's the power of a pure devotee. And people wonder, well, how did this Krishna consciousness movement begin in America at a time when people were experiencing or experimenting with free love, when people were experimenting with drugs, and everyone practically at that time was eating meat. There were very, very few vegetarians when Prabhupada came to America. And people wonder, how is it that a guru comes in that culture and he says, refrain from eating meat, refrain from taking drugs, refrain from sexual connections outside of marriage. It was like the very lifeblood of the hippie culture. So somehow or other, by Prabhupada's presence, people wanted to give up drugs. The drug culture, the hippie drug culture, and all of a sudden, people want to give up drugs. They want to give up illicit sexual connections with women. They want to give up meat eating. That's the power of a pure devotee. He can invoke within the heart these deep spiritual desires to serve Krishna. So, of course, we were very young. Prabhupada was in his 70s, so he was like a grandfather to us. And we did not have much experience in the world, and he had, of course, 70 years of experience. So we were getting educated very quickly, both materially and spiritually. And it's kind of interesting what Prabhupada was bringing to us. He was bringing to us a culture from a different time, not only the Indian culture, but the culture he grew up in India at the turn of the century. So he was bringing the wisdom of his own life experience, plus the ancient wisdom of the Vedas, to a group of Americans who had no connection with India, no connection with any culture outside of India. And very rapidly we were being educated and enlightened in Krishna consciousness. And very, very quickly, by his motivating talks, by his motivating presence, we were being elevated in Krishna consciousness. So of course, what Prabhupada did and what he taught were inseparable. And I had a wonderful experience. I was a temple president at an early age, and Prabhupada wanted to meet all the temple presidents when he was visiting a Rath Yatra festival. So I got the message early in the day, and the whole day I was thinking, what is this meeting going to be about? It sounds like a meeting, like a management meeting. That Prabhupada's like the CEO, and we're the presidents of the different branches, and so he's going to meet with us, and we're going to have a management meeting. And it's very interesting the way Prabhupada ran the movement, because the movement was very big. There's thousands and thousands of disciples, tens of thousands of members. There were temples practically everywhere in the world. So much was going on. And you would think, to run an organization like that, you would go into the office of the guru, the one who started it, and there'd be many desks, many telephones. In those days they had, what did they call it? Telefax machines? A few telefax machines, a few photocopy machines. You'd expect to be busy, 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 and many, many things going on. And you go into Prabhupada's room. It's just Prabhupada sitting behind a small desk. No telephone, no rigmarole, no ruckus, no people running around. And so I'm sitting in Prabhupada's room and I'm thinking, how is he running the movement? There's not even a telephone. There's not a million people running around doing things. What is going on here? So I'm sitting in the room, and now Prabhupada convenes the meeting of the presidents. And the entire time, he spoke to us to inspire us in our Krishna consciousness and inspire us in the mission of helping other people become Krishna conscious. He didn't even tell us how to do it. He didn't tell us how to do anything. He just inspired us with a vision. So that was Srila Prabhupada. He was the great inspirer. And he had almost mystical power because he's running a whole movement just by his words, not by a million phone calls, not by a million secretaries, not by a million communications around the world, but by his presence and by his inspiring words. Thousands of people are dedicating their lives 24 hours a day in the service of Krishna. That's how Prabhupada did it. And it was an amazing thing. It was an amazing thing for me to watch. Sometimes it didn't make sense materially, how it was going on. It was totally mystical. But by his words and by his presence, he could evoke so much dedication out of the hearts of his followers that virtually they were willing to do anything for him. There's a story, just to illustrate this point, the devotees, very early on in the movement, 1970, that means most of the devotees were 2 or 3 years in the movement. So 2 or 3 years before, that means they knew nothing about Krishna, had no idea who Krishna was. And they were, practically all of them, if not 90%, were involved with drugs, were involved with illicit sexual connection with the opposite sex. This was the normal lifestyle. A few years later, here they are now with Prabhupada in India. So they're traveling across India on a train, and Prabhupada meets a man, and the man says, "Do you have a center in Delhi?" And Prabhupada says, "No, we don't." And the man explains that Delhi is the capital, it's a major city of India, it's an important city, you should have a temple. And Prabhupada said, yes, you're right, we should have a temple. So when the train was not destined to go to Delhi, but it did stop in Delhi on its way, Prabhupada chose 4 or 5 disciples. He said, you get off the train here and you start a temple. No plan, nothing, just get off, start a temple, no money, just do it. And the disciples were so inspired by Srila Prabhupada, so dedicated to Srila Prabhupada and dedicated to his vision of spreading Krishna consciousness, that they would just get off the train in Delhi and depend on Krishna and start the Krishna consciousness movement. So Prabhupada used to say, many gurus have disciples that they pay to get them to do work. He says, I don't have to pay my disciples. It's a reciprocation of love. So Prabhupada had such affection and such dedication for his disciples that it invoked so much love. For example, we know, or you may know, that Prabhupada wrote about 50 volumes, 400 pages each of books. But what you may not know is when did he write them? Because from 1966 to 1977, Prabhupada traveled around the world, I believe 12 or 13 times. And it was during this time that he established the Hare Krishna movement. When he left the planet, there were 108 temples. That's 11 years, 108 temples. And there were numerous farms, restaurants, and schools. So to write requires peace and quiet. How could someone establish 108 temples in 11 years? It's not even 11 years because the movement really didn't get going until about 1971 or 72. Most of those temples were established in 7 years, or 6 years, or 5 years really. So how did he do it? He slept a few hours a night, and at night he would write books. And he would say, I'm writing these books for my disciples. This was his service to his disciples, these books, because here his legacy was left in his teachings. Because he said, if you want my presence, you want my association, you get it through my teachings. So he knew he didn't have long to live, and he wanted to leave his association with us eternally or perpetually. So he did that in his books. That was his dedication to us. Another example of his dedication was that he traveled extensively, and by maybe 1973, he was basically traveling somewhere every week or every few days.